This is Adam Yenser, and you're listening to the Matt Balaker podcast.
Good day, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the Matt Balaker podcast. You know, if you haven't talked to someone in a while, or maybe there's an old friend from high school you need to reach out to, do it today and encourage them to like, subscribe, and share this podcast. It'll help your life and theirs. Today's guest is just a delight. He's not only a comedian and an Emmy Award-winning writer, I don't think he's ever had a bad haircut in his life. For 10 years, he wrote on the Ellen DeGeneres Show. He has appeared on Conan, was a contributor on SNL's Weekend Update. He's written for the Oscars and recently joined the Babylon Bee, but all that pales in comparison to being on this podcast. So please welcome Adam Yenser to the show. How you doing, Adam?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me. Yeah, this is definitely the highlight of my career right here. This is what I've been working towards all these years.
I'm glad you admit it. It is for all, I guess, but they like to play coy and act like, oh no, I wrote for the Emmys or I was an Oscar writer, like in your case. But all those are small steps to the apex, and now it's all downhill, but it's a great view. So congratulations.
Thanks. And I think, I'm flattered that you think I have great hair. I think the secret to never having a bad haircut is just not changing it since high school. So it just, you kind of get it down if you never change anything for 25 years.
Well, you hit the genetic lottery because you have a solid hairline. And I think if you were getting a yearbook photo now, you'd be like one of the cool jocks who's probably going to a good school, but knows how to tackle and throw a football. That'd be my guess.
That has changed a lot since high school.
So speaking of high school, where did you grow up, Adam?
I'm from Pennsylvania originally. I grew up near Allentown in a small town called Macungie. I went to Emmaus High School. It was a public high school. We had a pretty big class. And then I went to Penn State University and moved to New York after that.
Wow. So let's slow down. So in high school, what, were you a theater geek? I mean, you're a smart dude, but what cliques did you run in?
Well, so that's this funny thing. I always wonder if this kind of impacted where I kind of fall in comedy today. I was somebody in high school, I think, who I got along with all the different cliques. I was by no means unpopular or an outsider, but I also never really felt like I was like a part of any of those cliques. It's like I could, hang out with some guys that were on the football team. I could hang out with, people that I went to youth group with at church. I could hang out with the nerdy kids. I got along with everybody. I was kind of, and I still am kind of introverted. I like socializing, but I'm in my own head a lot. I could make people laugh in high school that were my friends, but I was by no means a class clown or anything like that. I think one of the most flattering compliments I ever received, this was like before high school, when I was in 6th grade at a parent-teacher conference, my teacher told my parents that I reminded her of David Letterman. And my parents came home and told me, and we were all just like, that was the best thing the teacher said.
Were you doing stupid pet tricks during English class or what?
No, I think it was more, when we had writing assignments and stuff, I would try to inject humor into them. Me and one of my friends, Dan Shelley, he does comedy a little in Pennsylvania, and I still write with him sometimes. We met in 6th grade, and we would kind of make sketches for the class that we'd show on videos and show for class projects and stuff. So I think that's where my sense of humor came through. But in high school, I got along with people, but I never really felt like I was particularly a part of one clique or another.
That's probably good. I mean, did you participate in theater or plays or things like that?
No, actually, I was not a theater kid at all. I have 2 younger brothers. One of them did a lot of theater. He acted in a lot of the school plays. I think what I was involved with in high school, really, like I was in Boy Scouts. I hung out with friends a lot. I wasn't really into, like sports or clubs a whole lot in high school.
Fair enough. So you could kind of, float around and get along with a lot of people in high school, but you weren't the the boisterous class clown, and then you went to Penn State. So Jerry Sandusky, what do you think of his coaching? Not his personal life. I mean, can you organize a defense?
You just want me to talk him up. Jerry Sandusky was a great coach.
He's had a lot of that.
We're lucky to have. No,
were you there during that controversy?
So I was there. Let me think. I went to school at Penn State from 01 to 05.
Okay.
So I think the controversy didn't break until around 2010 or 11, I think is when it kind of surfaced. It might have been the year before, 2009 or 10. So I was at Penn State after Sandusky had finished coaching, but then later when all the allegations came out, it was like he still had keys to the locker rooms and still on campus, doing horrible things. It was hard for me though, because my whole family went to Penn State. So like my mom worked there. Two of my aunts and one of my uncles went there. Both my brothers went there. And Joe Paterno in Penn State football was just that was life in Pennsylvania.
He was
it was
god.
It was a very sad time. But there's actually a story I tell about it in stand up. Is so I loved Penn State. So all my Facebook profile pictures were always like me in Penn State attire or next to Penn, on the campus. And then when the Sandusky scandal broke, I decided to change my profile picture away from Penn State stuff for the first time in a while. And I changed it to a picture I'd taken at the Emmy Awards when I was working at Ellen. And I had a picture taken with Elmo and the guy who did his voice, Kevin Clash. And then months later, he got arrested for the same thing as Jerry Sandusky.
Eventually the arrow is going to point to you. It's like, what's the common denominator in all these photos?
But yes, Penn State was great, other than Jerry Sandusky.
It's a wonderful institution, proud tradition, not only football but academics. So
it's like saying 9/11 was a great day, other than the attack.
There was a blip, and super unfortunate.
It's other than that, it was
They still have excellent breakfast burritos in Manhattan too. The bagel sandwiches are second to none. So you're at Penn State. At what point did you start developing the comedy bug?
Definitely when I was even as a kid, I would say around 12, 13. I grew up watching SNL, watching Monty Python, watching every stand-up special they would air on Comedy Central back when they had Lounge Lizards and
the Comedy Central half hour. I think.
Comedy Central Presents, the half hours, all of those. And I think that's what I was kind of inundating myself with while other people were watching sitcoms and the sort of teen shows. I never really watched Friends. I never really watched Boy Meets World or Fresh Prince or Full House. I never really watched those. I was always just inundating myself with sketch comedy and stand up. The only sitcom I probably watched was The Cosby Show. And I got
you're continuing your tradition of sexual predators, but that's a quick aside.
Yes, proximity to horrible people.
We haven't talked about your time at Ellen yet, so hold on.
Yeah. So I definitely knew that I wanted to get into sketch writing. Probably by the time I hit high school, and then when I went to college at Penn State. I majored in film and video, and then I double majored in philosophy. And I took the film and video classes just because I wanted to get script writing down. I knew I wanted to get into sketch comedy. And then while I was at Penn State, they had a campus television network where I wrote for the student sketch comedy show for a little while. And then I got an internship eventually at Conan. My first internship at Penn State was at the Maury Povich Show. And then after that, I got the internship at Conan, and that's when I started.
I'm a fellow Conan intern. I had no idea. Was he in New York still? Yeah, I was in 99, 2000.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was there from 05. As an intern, I was there most of 05. And then I worked as a producer's assistant at Conan from 06 to 2010 or 11.
So I remember Brian Kiley and I'm now friends, was ridiculously nice to everyone.
Yeah.
And I thought it was I mean, an act is not the right word, but like, you know, I was wondering, like, can he always be this cool? Because I remember Andy Richter was generally extremely cool. Then I remember like seeing Kylie 10 years later. I had nothing to help him with, and he treated me like as nice as he could. I mean, just a gem of a human being.
Yeah, Brian Kiley is great. He's such a nice guy, and he's such a just fantastic comedian and joke writer. Whenever I do shows with him somewhat regularly, and I'm always excited to see his new jokes. And then every joke that I've heard already makes me laugh just as hard every time. It's so good. Yeah, and he was always like one of the best monologue writers on Conan too.
So you're at Conan, and what were your duties there?
So I started off as a general production intern, running around Manhattan, picking up props, we still had videotapes at that time. So it was, you had to run downtown to pick up Betamax tapes and stuff and bring them back to Rockefeller Center, getting producers and writers coffee. There was some fun aspects to it too. I mean, it was all fun. You just felt like no matter what you were doing, you felt you were working at the coolest comedy show there was, and you're in Rockefeller Center, New York City. You just feel like you're in the center of the world. Yeah. So like every task, no matter how mundane it was, you were like, this is the coolest thing ever. But there was some fun stuff where they would put interns in the background in sketches sometimes. And one of the most fun things, they used to do kids drawings. It was one of the sketches where the premise was that NBC tour group had come through the Conan studio that day, and they asked the kids to, make drawings of their experience and stuff. And so then the writers would pitch the concepts for these ideas that the kids drew. And then they would give the interns a bunch of crayons and construction paper, and we'd draw the drawings, and they would show them on the show during the comedy segment. So, as an intern, seeing anything you did, no matter how little you contributed, seeing it on air was just awesome. And then eventually I became a control room intern, which was really cool because then I'd be in the control room at Studio 6A during Conan's rehearsals, answering phones for the producer and director. And that you get a whole other kind of perspective from the show, because you could always watch the show as it was recording, but when you're actually in the control room, hearing the writers give notes, hearing the director, make the calls and stuff. It was very cool. And it's where I learned Conan was just one of the best people in the industry that I've ever seen at he's such a brilliant guy and a nice guy. But when you see him working out what the writers have given him, sometimes the sketches would just be brilliantly funny from the start and you'd be cracking up. And sometimes there'd be things that didn't work. And I've seen other shows where it's like, if it doesn't work, it gets cut and you never see it again. Conan was so good at being like, well, that didn't work, but let's move this here, or let's lean into the fact that this didn't work and make a joke about it. It's going off the rails, or let's rework it and rehearse it later in the week. And it would always turn into something that was just fantastically funny.
He was a master. I think the best laughs are when the bits bomb. Yeah. And he recognizes that and plays off of it. Yeah. So at what point, Adam, did you kind of move from the production side to grabbing a mic and telling jokes?
So yeah, after I moved to New York, when I got hired full-time at Conan, like I said, I wanted to get into writing and sketch comedy, but stand-up had always been in the back of my head as something that I really wanted to try. And I probably wrote down jokes in a notebook for 3 years before I got the nerve to actually get up on stage and try it. And then it was actually during the writer's strike in 2007 when Conan was off the air for like 2 weeks. So we were kind of out of work. And I had just gone through a breakup at the time. So I was like down and had nothing to do all day. And I was like, you know what? I've got nothing going on. I'm going to go out there and try stand-up. And it was the midnight open mic at the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater on Saturday nights. It was called Gut Bucket, I think. And Pete Holmes hosted it at the time. He was like an open mic host. Wow. So yeah, that was my first time. You go out and you put your name in the bucket. And there's two strategies when you're going out to try stand up for the first time. Some people bring a whole bunch of friends because they want the support. I was the opposite mindset where I'm like, I'm going to sneak out and not tell anyone I'm doing this so that if I bomb and I suck, I can pretend it never happened.
Like, we just won't talk about it. Yeah.
I don't want anyone to, I'll pretend this was not a thing that ever happened.
And was Conan, was he in LA at the time, or is he still?
That was still New York. He was in New York until 2009. And then that's when the show moved to LA. Yeah.
So how did it go? Your first?
It went good. I would not, overstate it and say I killed, but I did, 5 minutes, and the jokes got laughs, and there was a decent turnout at the mic that night. Those shows that nowadays, when I try to find open mics in New York or LA, they're always like poorly attended, or it's just comics. In that era, I think it might have just been the UCB theater had this reputation where any show there was cool, so they would always get an audience out. There was actually a decent sized audience, and I remember bits and pieces of being on stage, and I remember hearing laughs, and I remember a few of the jokes I did. But what I remember most is, like, as soon as I got off stage, there was this feeling of like, oh, this is what I want to do. It was instant.
You found your calling. Yeah.
Yes, it was like sketch writing is great, and monologue writing is great. I love this, but being I guess like the control freak thing, like it's your writing, your delivery, immediate reaction from the audience. And it's just like, oh, this is what I love doing. And then I went out the next week and just bombed, just hated it.
That's a common theme. Like, my first time was also in New York. It was at, I think, Hamburger Harry's is in Times Square. Similar thing, it's just this high for doing it. And then later when that initial euphoria wears off, and your friends are no longer there. I know my friends weren't there the first time, but it quickly changes, and you're always like, okay, I got to put in the work now. So you instantly liked stand-up, but you're still at Conan in a kind of production role. How did kind of your day job grow, as well as your calling for stand-up?
So I started off when I started at Conan. Like I said, I was interning there. And was Jason Chalemi there when you worked there? He was a field producer.
No,
at Conan. What I did, I found out later, it's called the Jason Chalemi plan for employment, which is you just intern forever until they hire.
We had some of those, yeah.
You're supposed to just do not supposed to, but an internship runs for 1 semester of college, and you have to get college credit for it. So I had taken a spring semester off from my senior year at Penn State and delayed graduating for a year. And I interned full time then. And then I told them, I was like, I'm not doing anything over the summer. I'll keep coming in 3 days a week. And they were like, yeah, that's fine. And then on my final semester at Penn State in the fall, I found out I had no Friday classes. So I was like, hey, I can still intern on Fridays. So on Thursday nights, after my last class ended at like 5 p.m., I would drive 3 hours from central Pennsylvania to Allentown, sleep over at my parents' house for the night, take a bus 2 hours to New York in the morning to intern on Friday. Then over the weekend, I'd go back to Penn State.
Wow. So where were you staying in New York?
I didn't stay overnight in New York. I would take the bus then 2 hours back at night to Pennsylvania. And I would do that like every Friday for the semester. And then after I graduated, it was about 5 months later, the person who had been my intern coordinator at Conan, she moved to HBO. And I got hired as the receptionist and intern coordinator. So it's kind of just, like the office receptionist for a while. But it was a blast. It's like, you were there as an intern. You just feel like you're at the
and it was the receptionist that I think essentially hired me,
Yep.
And he had a side gig selling like DJ equipment online. I was like, this is just the coolest dude ever.
Yeah. And then
Anthony Caterina, shout outs to him if he's listening.
Oh, okay.
Anthony Caterina was his name.
People, they go on to do cool things from that position. My first intern coordinator there, I think I interviewed with a guy, Roey Hershkovitz, who then became one of the music coordinators at Conan. And then my other intern coordinator took over for him was Aaron Cohen, who then went on to be a producer at Colbert Report. And I think he might still be with Colbert now, but he a bunch of the Conan people moved over when the Colbert Report started. And then, Carrie Aldridge was my other coordinator, and she moved to HBO after that. I did that for a while, and then I got hired as a segment producer's assistant. So that was my first step into like the actual full-time job in the production world. So that was awesome.
I worked for segment producers, but for the millions of people tuning in right now, what is segment production, Adam?
So on a show like Conan, they're the people who produce the guest interview segments. At Conan, there was 3 of them, and they'd kind of share the guests, but it generally worked out. One of them kind of dealt with the like A-list celebrities, the bigger names. One of them dealt with comedians and people who were more from the comedy world, and then one was more assigned like human interest guests. And they all had overlaps. Like, they would all do the bigger names from time to time if it was somebody they had a relationship with. But before the guest interview segments, segment producer will call the guest and have, like 20-minute conversation with them about what's going on in their life, what stories they have to tell. And then they'll have a meeting with Conan or whoever the host is and kind of go over those notes and say, here's the stories that we got. Here's the areas that are funny or interesting. And then they'll put together, they call it a blue card because it's literally a blue card that all the hosts have. And so the guest interview segments, they're never like scripted or planned in any specific sense, but they have kind of targeted questions. So, they might be talking to a guest and say, oh, what was it like working on the set of this latest movie? And, maybe one of their co-stars played a prank on them or something. So they'll ask, then the question would be, what was it like working with so-and-so? So they're kind of targeted questions to get to the most entertaining segments. And then the one segment producer there that I worked with a lot was Frank Smiley. It's just, they were all great, but Frank would often incorporate these like extra segments into the guest segments. Like I know when Will Ferrell was on one time, he had this pitch where he said his new hobby is dog training. And so he brought out this like big dog obstacle course from behind the curtains. And then he would just bring out 4 untrained dogs and just let them run loose through the studio as he yells at them. So some of the segments are just talk segments. And then some of them would involve these more elaborate things where you'd have to get together, props or sketch actors to act in it in some capacity. But yeah, they're kind of the ones who make that happen. And then the writers work on the scripted sketch segments.
So what do you think kept you there? I know it was pretty much every intern's wet dream to get hired in some paying capacity, and you did it. I mean, I guess it was going there on Fridays or what? What advice would you give?
Well, anyone out there who's, in college right now or out of college and going this sort of internship route, I think it's the best way absolutely to get into the entertainment industry. And, what worked for me, there were certainly other interns that did this as well, but there's a lot that don't, is take the bitch work. Like whenever it's like the end of the day and you're tired and you want to go home and somebody is like, oh, I need you to run down. The Rockefeller Center was on 50th. They'd be like, oh, you have to run down to, 6th Street or something, this video production studio, and pick up a clip for tomorrow. And you just say, yeah, I'm going to do that. I'll hang around. I'll be here until 7:30 or 8 at night, going down to do that.
I remember doing some of those Dean and DeLuca runs late at night. Yes. And I was like, I could never afford this stuff, but I'm here
for ours, it was a place called Allen's Alley. That was like this video rental place, like way downtown, that we would always have to either drop off videos or pick up videos there at the end of the day. And just, get to know as many people there as you can. And understand that, like I said, I started getting people coffee. Like don't mess up the coffee order. That's
if they say 2 sugars, 1 milk, it's 2 sugars, 1 milk. Damn it! Don't mess it up.
But it's surprisingly hard, both someone who worked as an intern and then being the intern coordinator. There were a lot of great interns that I worked with, but what I found is it's surprisingly hard to find people that are good interns. Like it's when you're actually there in that environment.
That makes sense.
And you're interviewing people, because I think a lot of people who do go into it with the mindset of like, I'm really going to give this my all. You think, why would anyone in this situation, if you're interning for a place like Conan or SNL or, back in the day, like Letterman, it's like, why would you not want to just give it 110% every single day? But, there are a lot that either it's not as glamorous as they thought it would be, or, they just have other commitments and stuff like that. And like I said, I'm by no means the only intern that was kind of putting in the work, but it is hard in this industry to find good interns, and you will stand out if you are the one, kind of putting in the time and the effort. Yeah.
So you were the superstar intern who gets hired.
And like I said, I did the Jason Chalemi intern until you're hired plan.
Does the Jason Chalemi?
If you're, there's a lot of good interns in one semester, but if you're able to just linger as long as you can, Yeah, it's not a guaranteed job, but it probably helps you a little bit, to just refuse to go away.
So, but you didn't stay there forever. You eventually got a job at Ellen. Were you on Craigslist or Indeed? Like, how did you land that gig?
It's funny you said that, because I did not get the Ellen job through Craigslist, but two of the other writers that I was there,
oh no way,
did get it on Craigslist.
That's awesome.
Yeah. They Ellen. I always liked Ellen as a stand-up, but I didn't watch the show. Yeah, I didn't watch the show regularly though. I thought it was funny whenever I'd catch it, but it wasn't, part of my regular viewing. And when I was at Conan so they moved to Los Angeles through the Tonight Show thing, and then there was the whole Jay Leno drama.
Oh, that was fun.
TBS, yeah. And then I had been a segment producer's assistant for 6 years at that point, and wanted to get into writing, and a writing job opened at Conan, and I applied, but I didn't get it. And so writing jobs there rarely open, because it's just a cool place to be. So people stay there forever. So I started applying elsewhere for writing jobs, and Ellen and Conan were both on the Warner Brothers lot in LA. The studios were kind of next to each other. And one of the other producer's assistants at Conan, Carrie O'Keefe, she had heard from a friend that there was a writing opening at Ellen. So at that point, I had started doing this thing where you freelance for Weekend Update, where you kind of submit jokes, and then they give you like $100 if they use one.
Yeah.
And I heard it when she told me about the writing job at Ellen. I basically sent them a submission of Weekend Update style jokes, because I wasn't real familiar with Ellen's show. And I didn't know if I'd hear anything back. And their producers called me a week later and said, "Hey, we really like your jokes. They're not really Ellen's style. If we send you some sample monologues, can you resubmit in her voice?" So they sent
That was nice of them.
Yeah. So the jokes must have made a good impression on them. But yeah, it wasn't really Ellen's kind of perspective or world. So they sent me 3 scripts of her monologues, which are, if you know her show, if you don't, her monologues printed out, they're about 1.5 pages, 2 pages, and they're not like late night monologue style. They're more like a story from her life, or her kind of perspective on thing, or something that happened to her that week told in a funny way. So I read those monologues, and I went online over the weekend and watched every single Ellen clip of anything that I could find. I watched every YouTube clip from her show I could come across. I rewatched her old stand-up specials. I watched her old Johnny Carson set. I was just like kind of inundating myself in that voice. And I resubmitted the monologues again. And then they called me in for an interview. And I definitely had her voice a little more down by that point. I remember one of my monologues I submitted had some joke about Osama bin Laden dying in it. And they're like, these are good. Ellen would not do that joke. But the rest of it,
she might want to go a different direction.
Yeah. And then the head writer, Kevin Nealon, at the time, he and the 3 executive producers, I sat down with them and interviewed with them, and then started writing there. And it was such a thrill to be writing there. And it was also intimidating and a really sharp learning curve, because even after submitting in that voice, coming from the late night world to a daytime world, Ellen's an interesting show because it's structured like late night, and the sort of humor is very similar to the late night structure, but because it's all coming from her perspective and it's for a daytime audience, it's a very hard voice to get down. Like that show is, like I said, those 2 writers got the job through Craigslist. That show is known for chewing through writers. There's some that last a long time, but there's a lot that the way. Sorry, go ahead.
I was thinking Greg Fitzsimmons survived. I know he's been there a long time, or had been there a long time. But
Greg was there. I think
it's a wood chipper.
I think he left 2 years before I started. But yeah, there was Greg Fitzsimmons stories that I heard while I was there. And then I always the writing staff at Ellen, I always got along with all of them great. It was a really cool group of people to write
so
with.
What was once you're there, a few years, like what is the day-to-day like?
So we would at Ellen, they don't divide between monologue and sketch writers. On late night shows, it's usually some writers assigned just sketches, some writers assigned just monologue. At Ellen, we would do both. Fridays was always our pitch meeting for the coming week. So we'd get our assignments. They'd say, you know, Adam, you have a monologue on Tuesday and a sketch segment on Thursday or something like that. And then I would meet with the other writers, the producers, the head writer, and pitch, you know, my ideas for each of those. They'd approve usually not the one I wanted to do and some other one, and then I have to develop that idea more. And then the morning of the show that you're kind of assigned, we'd have a meeting with Ellen around like 11 a.m. where we'd look through the first draft of the script. And then she and the producers would give notes. And then we'd go back and make the changes. We'd have a rehearsal around like noon or 1 o'clock, get more notes after that. And then the show would usually tape around 3 o'clock. And we'd have that time in between to kind of make the last minute changes. And so each writer there on the show, there was about 8 or 9 of us at any given time. If you have an assignment that day, like you're personally in charge of that script. But any writers who don't have an assignment that day, you can kind of collaborate with them and, you know, help to punch things up, you know. And then on days when I don't have an assignment, I would go in their office and kind of help them address whatever notes Ellen or the producers had given.
So you're a utility player, Adam. I think it's a valuable skill. So at a place known for kind of high turnover, you were there for what, 6 years or what was your
10 years?
Oh, wow. Okay, sorry, a decade.
I was at Conan for 6 and then Ellen for 10. Yeah.
Wow. So what do you think contributed to your longevity at Ellen?
In the beginning, it was that our head writer, Kevin Nealon, liked me and kept advocating to keep me there. I don't think I would have lasted otherwise.
Thank you, Kevin.
Because it really was, like I said, it was a tough learning curve, and it was not, and I heard later that this is pretty typical. It took me about a year before I even felt like I was consistently getting her voice down. And then from there, you know, it took several more months to another year before I felt like I was really, you know, hitting the sort of highest quality of material for her voice that I could. But yeah, the way writers' contracts work, and this is pretty typical, you get a 1-year contract with 13-week options to start, which means you can't leave for a year, but they can fire you every 13 weeks. So you would get this little letter on your desk every 13 weeks when you'd come in on a Monday, and there was just an envelope with your name on it, and you'd open it up and it would say, you know, hopefully we've decided to exercise the next extension on your contract, you know? Yeah. But in those beginning days when I started there, there'd be days when I'd come in and I'd have, you know, like great pitches, and I'd get on the board and I'd be like, oh, this is great, I can do this. And there'd be weeks when I'm like, I have nothing. They're going to fire me. Like I got nothing on the board this week. And I always tell people there's this thing that happens when, like, I always wanted to get into comedy writing. And then you have all these ideas and you're like, oh, I'm going to be so funny. And I watch all these shows and I know what I would do with it. And then you get hired. And for your first like month or 2 months, you have every idea you've ever thought of. You know?
Sure.
This. And then those 2 months go by. I've pitched every idea I've ever had, and there's 10 months of the season left. You know? It's like everything I ever thought would be funny, I've pitched and I'm out, you know? So then, collaborating with other writers who had been there longer really helped me get the voice down when I started. There was a writer, Beth Sherman, who was there, who really kind of helped me a lot. Another writer, Amy Rhodes, that was there that I worked with a lot. And then, Kevin Nealon was great. And there's Lauren Pomerantz, who was one of the longest running writers at Ellen. Just kind of working with them, and they would sit with me and help me punch up monologues when they weren't in Ellen's voice. And when I started getting a few hits here and there that Ellen really liked, that's when I really kind of felt like I hit my groove there. I think it was about a year and a half in, I came up with this idea where there was a news story about people who were getting fired from their jobs because their bosses had found like embarrassing pictures on their Facebook or Instagram profiles. And so we had this running bit that I came up with that we started based off that story, where we always got all the email addresses for the audience members before the show. So we would look up their Facebook and like find embarrassing pictures they posted and have Ellen be like, you know, hey, we wanted to see if people really post all these embarrassing photos. So we went through all of your Facebook photos and here's some of what we found. And that became a really strong running bit. I would say that was my first segment there that really, made a good impression, kind of took off. And then I started doing the Kevin the Cashier bits, which were these hidden camera segments where I worked different places and kind of prank the customers. Kevin, our head writer, actually came up with that for me, but that segment really took off then also.
Yeah, I know you were on, was it the last Blockbuster? Was that a spin-off from this character, or how did that come to be?
Yeah, the clip of me in the last Blockbuster is from a segment I did on Ellen. We shot a Kevin the Cashier at the last Blockbuster in Oregon, where I worked there. I kind of messed with the customers, told them I needed to rewind DVDs. There's a lady who wanted her DVD cleaned, so I took forever doing it. And then they used some footage of that in the last Blockbuster documentary, which as a 90s kid, it's like to be in the last Blockbuster
That's an
documentary.
Awesome credit.
Even for 3 seconds, it was pretty cool, yeah.
I'll take it. So you were there at the time when there was a lot of news coverage about a hostile work environment. What was like the news version, and how did that compare to the reality?
It's interesting because I think the truth is that it was a very tough place to work. It was a very demanding environment. I understand a lot of what they said. There was some truth to difficulties that people had working there. I always got along with Ellen. I wouldn't have stayed there 10 years if I didn't like it. I think some of the stuff was exaggerated in that, she could be tough to work for, but then there was things like you couldn't make eye contact with her, which wasn't true at all.
That was only 2 days a week. Yeah.
That's the rumor that I feel like they make up about every celebrity who's, supposed to be mean. I didn't like, I think Kevin, our head writer, I think he got thrown under the bus a little bit in those articles. He was always great to work for.
So what were some of the accusations? I mean, you mentioned not having eye contact, which is kind of a trope, but like.
So I can't get into like all of it because a lot of it is stuff that I didn't actually, a lot of it's stuff I didn't actually witness or experience. But there was the allegations were of toxic workplace and like sexual harassment claims against different people. The sexual harassment stuff is which I wasn't, privy to that stuff. So I don't know what was going on there.
You welcomed it all, so there's no pushback.
Yeah. But it's like I've always said, it was a really tough place to work. But I wouldn't have stayed there 10 years if my experience was bad there. And I think what was hard about it is, as someone who lasted there a long time, I definitely did experience some of the tough environment working there. And I think it was hard is if you lasted there, people who, when they did chew through writers or when there was a lot of turnover at the sort of lower levels, I think people identified anyone who lasted there as kind of being part of the system, as being part of, you're
the oppressors, or you're
exactly. And so that's something that I wrestled with, a lot. It's one of the things I'm always like hesitant about how much I can say or not say about it. You know what I mean?
Well, you've already said too much, so thank you. I'm going to use this against you for years to come. So
cut up the soundbite.
You're at Ellen, and you're living in Los Angeles, and I know this takes a lot of courage. You came out. Did a lot of your writers know you were conservative?
It's funny. Everyone I think knew I was conservative because I've never hidden the fact that I'm conservative. Even at Conan, people knew I was conservative.
And they still hired you.
They did. And there's other like secret conservatives. There's not many of them, but there are other people on staff.
There's the friend of AIDS group.
Yeah. But yeah, I never hid the fact that I was conservative. The producers always knew it. I feel like I get, especially nowadays with cancel culture and sort of backlash and how politicized everything has been and how kind of divided everybody is. I get there's kind of a fear to be openly conservative in Hollywood. but my mindset
and
was
for
always,
people who don't know, like, how partisan would you say the Hollywood writing and production community is?
extremely partisan, extremely left leaning. Like when I was at
Like 80, like 60%, or closer to like 94 in your opinion?
I would say over 75% at least. And what I find about it is, I would say it's over 70% in terms of the writers themselves. Although I think I would say, in my experience, and sort of optimistically, over the last 3 to 5 years, a lot of people, they're still more left leaning, but they're sort of moderating a little bit, because a lot of them don't like cancel culture and don't like how extreme things have gotten on the left. Where I think it's really kind of influential and heavy-handed is the producers at the shows are either extremely left-leaning themselves and simply don't allow conservative content to get out there, or if they're even open to that, they're afraid of the backlash from people further to the left. So they might say, oh yeah, we there's totally an audience for this and we need something like that, but we're not going to do it here, Yeah. And then the Writers Guild especially is just, it's a creative union that you have to join to be a writer. And, I think as a guild or a union, they do a lot of good work in terms of, securing benefits for writers, securing the rules that govern contracts and stuff like that. But they also use it as just a political mouthpiece for the left, just constantly, like one of the
it's like the American Bar Association. Yeah.
One of the experiences I had early on, not early on, but after the 2016 election when Trump won, the Writers Guild hosted this event, and it was called like Writing or Politics in the Era of Trump, and it was like this panel, and I'm trying to think who all was on it. Norman Lear was on it, and then like 3 other producers, and I went because they build it as like it's going to be a conversation about what writing and politics are going to be like in the era of Trump. I went there and it was a packed room at the Writers Guild, and it was 4 people who all hated Trump, and then the president of the Writers Guild who also hated Trump, and then a room full of people who hated Trump who were literally crying because Trump won. They opened it up for questions, and it's just like this. It's like adults venting and crying because their candidate lost. And then they opened it for questions, and I went up and I got the microphone and I said, "You guys want to know why Trump won? It's because of this." I said, all of Hollywood, you're all out of touch with what middle America is. You're all out of touch with these people. You didn't book a single pro-Trump voice on this whole panel. You have 4 people here. They're all on the same side. And then the whole room starts booing and murmuring.
Were you murdered? Like, how'd you make it out of there alive, Adam?
And then I go, you didn't bring one person to this conversation from the other side. You didn't bring one conservative voice here to the Writers Guild in Hollywood that creates
one moderate voice.
All the content for the country that everyone consumes creatively comes mostly from the Writers Guild, and you don't have one person from the other side represented. And that
not a lot of inclusion, not a lot of
and I haven't I haven't been at other events in person like that since then, mostly because I don't go to the WGA events very often. But that attitude hasn't changed at all. It's like, it's not just to secure the best sort of working environments for writers. These guilds will send out emails promoting, BLM, promoting transgender stuff, promoting, Democratic candidates exclusively, never endorsing Republican candidates for anything. And it's like, you are making the creative content for the entire country, and you are all not just on one side, but as far as you can be on that side. And, I think that's what makes it more intimidating about being openly conservative. It's not that you don't run into other people behind the scenes who agree with you, or even people who are more moderate and say, I'm not as extreme as those people are. But, it is hard to get that perspective out there, So I was openly conservative at Ellen, but I don't think I got anything conservative on the air whenever I pitch.
That shows your value as a writer. I mean, it's a comedy show, and comedy, spans the spectrum. So, but you left Ellen, and now you're at a place where I'd say ideologically is quite different.
Yeah.
Babylon Bee. What led to that, Adam?
So Babylon Bee, I'd been in touch with Seth Dillon a little bit, the CEO of the Babylon Bee, over email a couple of years ago, maybe like the year before the pandemic, or no, it was after that, because during the pandemic, I started doing this YouTube show, Canceled News, where it's kind of like a right-leaning weekend update that I do myself.
Very funny, yes.
And I was, thanks, and I was pitching some version of that to Seth, and we kind of went back and forth a little bit, but nothing really came of it. And I'd still had 1 year left at Ellen. And then the year after I left Ellen, someone who I knew at Daily Wire put me in touch with Ethan and Kyle, who hosted the Babylon Bee podcast at the time. And I came on as just a comedian panelist, their kind of third chair for their weekly podcast. And then after I left Ellen, it was about 6 months after that, Ethan reached out to me and said, we really liked having you on. Would you want to come in and do freelance stuff for us more regularly? Because they were expanding more into sketch content on YouTube, because Babylon Bee is known mostly for their satire articles. But they were expanding more into podcasts and sketches. So I started freelancing in August. And then Ethan moved to Daily Wire in December. And then I became the sort of the co-host on the podcast with Kyle, and became full-time in January. So yeah, it's a great place. I pitch, headlines, help them with their sketch writing, and then co-host the podcast. But it brings me back in my head what I'm saying now between Ellen and the Babylon Bee. It brings me back to what I was saying about like high school, where it's like I got along with all the cliques, but I never felt like I fit in with any of them. I always I like the people I work with at Ellen. I like the show, and I like the Babylon Bee, and I like the people I work with. But it always feels like at Ellen, it's like I was the one conservative. So there were some people there that just thought it was kind of odd or quirky, and there's some people that actively didn't like that.
Right.
Now it's like at Babylon Bee, it's people who I'm like ideologically more in line with. But because it's a Christian conservative platform, I always say when I go out to clubs and do my comedy, people are always like, oh, it's so clean. You're so clean. At Babylon Bee, it's like if I say, anything innuendo, it's considered like dirty.
Yeah.
So, it's that thing where I still...
You're an outsider wherever you go.
I still wish there was a platform or, an outlet in the mainstream comedy world that was right-leaning in a way that you could just be conservative without it being overtly political. I think that's what's kind of hurting comedy a lot nowadays. Everything is so polarized. There's conservative comedy for conservative audiences, and then left-leaning comedy for left-leaning audiences. And I would love if there was just a late-night show where it wasn't politics all the time, but when they touched on politics, it was more right-leaning than left-leaning.
It could be like Carson or Leno, but where it's really comedy first. You hit on a good point, Adam. I mean, entertainment is so siloed, and that's one thing I love about live stand-up is not that it isn't biased in some ways, or that comics aren't, but people don't want to generally split the room. And so there's still value to being able to appeal to the masses. Yeah. And I don't know if that can be applied. I mean, hopefully it can to TV, but I guess that, how do you think the entertainment business has changed? I mean, I guess most dramatically since you started, call it 17 years ago.
I think in terms of the late night shows and sort of the mainstream comedy shows, politically, what I think is bad is that they are just kind of playing each to their own audience, and there's nothing kind of in the middle. I think SNL tries to be more central with some of their stuff, but there's still, way more to the left than the right. And I think about back in the days of Johnny Carson, Letterman, Conan, Leno. I wasn't a big Leno fan, but he was in that group also. And it's like, when you look at Letterman, I think was more left leaning. Leno was probably center right. Conan was more center left. but you didn't know their
Right.
politics about everything or hear it every single night. You know, it's like maybe a joke every now and then would be a little heavy-handed, or like when Jon Stewart took over The Daily Show, he was definitely more left-leaning, but that show still had a broad audience. So it's like all of America was still watching the same thing. We were still all on the same page. Now what's weird is like everyone I know on the right, they don't watch Colbert, and I don't watch Colbert anymore. I used to love him, and his show has become so political and heavy-handed, it's not enjoyable to watch. So there's an audience watching that, and then the rest of the country isn't paying attention. And there's people who I'll say like, "Oh, have you heard of the Babylon Bee?" And they'll say, "No, I haven't heard of that." Or there's other those people that are sort of in the right wing space, like Steven Crowder. It's like they have this huge audience, but then there's part of the country who does not know who they are, and it's becoming so polarized where it's like we're each doing our own thing, and I wish we were still all watching the same comedy.
Right.
And I think cancel culture has weighed on that. And then the other thing that I think has weighed on the entertainment industry and comedy in particular that I think is as bad or worse than cancel culture and politics is this shift towards, like, TikTok is at the forefront of it now, but it's this shift towards algorithm pleasing clickbait kind of comedy, if you can even call it comedy, where there's these sort of YouTube stars and Instagram influencers who put out these videos that get millions of views, but it's because of either their following or the title has the keywords in it that the algorithm likes. And you watch there's a lot now that are of the format like I call them like if, how, when comedy sketches.
If, how, when.
It's like when a vegan goes shopping, or if a liberal talk to a conservative. And they're barely sketch comedy. They're just these like simplistic act outs, usually filmed on an iPhone with like one or two people. And they just seem like they're dumbing down what comedy is. And, it's like, I know a lot of comics complain about the fact that like influencers will get booked at comedy clubs now. There are people that make these, 10-second TikTok videos. And then because they can fill seats, they get booked at a comedy club to do a half an hour of stand-up, and they can't do it. But it still puts butts in the seat because they have a following. And it just feels like I've even noticed it, with Babylon Bee videos, with my own videos on YouTube. The best ones aren't necessarily the ones that get the most views. It's the ones that are most clickbaitable and algorithm pleasing. And I don't know how we go back from that, really, because it seems like there's a generation that's being raised on that kind of content.
Well, you're very algorithm pleasing, Adam. I'm curious. We're wrapping up, but I want to get your thoughts on what's something that you've changed your mind on over your lifetime. Like what's, whether it's politics or not, just something like, I used to feel strongly this and now I don't.
I'm trying to think what I would say I've changed my mind on. Trump. I was a never Trumper when he first ran in 2016. I didn't want to vote for him at all. I didn't know what kind of president he'd be. I didn't think he was really. I couldn't tell whether he was really conservative or really a Republican. He just seemed to come from the entertainment background. And then, I think there's still things where I'm not afraid to disagree with Trump on. Like, I'm definitely not a like stop the steal person. I wish that the whole like election was a fraud thing would go away, and I've never supported that. But I changed my mind on Trump. I think there's probably other things I've changed on also. But
and how do you think comedy has changed over the last, call it 20, 25 years?
It's weird because I think audiences, it seems like they have gotten more sensitive in certain regards. But when you go out to the comedy clubs, there's definitely people that still want, comedy in its purest form. And that gives me hope, And the sort of the big names out there, like the Chappelles and Bill Burrs and stuff that are kind of doing this really brilliant and really pure stand-up that's not beholden to one political view or the other, and kind of isn't afraid to offend both sides. I think we definitely need that. Like one of the things I've noticed in my own stand-up that I think is weird is I still do like self-deprecating jokes sometimes every now and then. They're jokes that used to get laughs every time. Now I've noticed more and more self-deprecating jokes get "aww."
Like, I know a good therapist.
You're like, no, I don't want that. I don't want that reaction, But there's this, maybe it's something in the culture with the focus on feelings and all this sensitivity stuff. But audiences, I would say, have gotten more sensitive in some regards. What worries me the most is, and I'm sure it's tied a little bit to politics, but Bill Carter wrote a essay that was on CNN last week about the golden age of late night is over. And, I worry about the future of late night because that's what I loved growing up. That's where I got my start in my career in comedy. It's still my favorite format. But it's true that, when I look at the landscape of late night shows today, there's not any that stand out the way like a Letterman or a Conan used to. They're not like a Johnny Carson. Right. There's shows, and they still produce funny stuff from time to time, but I think the audience for that is dying, or at least it's lower than it was now. Maybe it'll come back. Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah, go ahead. I was just gonna say, and so I hope late night survives in some form as we shift to kind of streaming and short form videos. I hope that format survives in some way. Yeah.
What will be the next evolution of late night? Well, I want to end with this, Adam. What are you most optimistic about?
I think what I'm most optimistic about is I do see that as much as people complain about cancel culture and political correctness, which I think was gaining ground for years, in people like Chappelle and Bill Burr, and especially Netflix standing by Chappelle, and when you see musical acts that people are trying to cancel, and then they'll let them perform at the Super Bowl and stuff like that, I think there is a shift in the momentum that's happening right now. And now there still are a lot of the sort of woke crowd and censorship crowd that's kind of still pushing that ideology. But I think a lot of people, even if they are more on the left on other political issues, people, they love free speech, they love comedy, they love art. And I think we are seeing a sort of momentum shift against that a little bit. And that gives me some optimism.
Very nice. Well, where can people learn more about you and what you're doing?
You can check out my website, adamyenser.com, for upcoming stand-up shows. I tour pretty regularly all over the country. Subscribe to the Babylon Bee on YouTube and the Babylon Bee podcast channel. And then you can check out my own canceled news show on my YouTube channel, just under my name, Adam Yenser.
Please do that. Adam Yenser, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Matt Balaker podcast. To learn more, please check out mattbalaker.com and encourage your friends to like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate it.